Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a new webinar from Frame Next project. Very warm welcome to all of you, wherever you are in Europe or other parts of the world. Today we have a very exciting speaker, Alexander Frötscher, who is with us from Austria Tech, who is going to tell us about the latest work on this exciting project. Now, this webinar is hosted by the Ertico Academy, and we all welcome you all. We will record this webinar, so just for your information, that we will also have possibility to share the recording afterwards. So, Julia, can you please start the recording?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Okay, very good. And just some house rules, basically. So we very much expect and hope that this is going to be a very live and active webinar. Please be active with your questions. You can ask the questions through the questions window or through the chat. And I will be able to follow them, and I will be able to ask Alexander as well at a suitable time whatever you are wondering about the presentation. The project Frame Next is the latest one in a row of different Frame activities that has been ongoing for a number of years with support of the European Commission. It is basically supporting development and maintenance of the EU ITS framework architecture. And now we have a pleasure to present to you version 5.0. So I don't want to take too much time from my side. I would just like to welcome Alexander. And Alexander, thank you very much for being with us today. Please tell us about the latest developments of the Frame Next project and the EU ITS architecture.
Hi, thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to share the current results of Frame Next with you. I know that for many of you, the European framework architecture is something that in the background exists, but you don't regularly use and interact with in your regular daily business or in regular working processes you have. And this was seen also from the beginning of Frame Next as a big topic and a big challenge to handle. And I think we have, from the Frame team, we have seen this as well, that having these high-level architectures, which at the end of the day have their own software tools, but don't integrate into daily work, have difficulties to be used and to be user-friendly. And this was the background of Frame Next. And I would like to show you today that what we have done and how this has changed. And I think the big news is that Frame Next has done a whole migration of the complete architecture materials to a standard tool used in the ITS industry. Yeah, so we now don't generate our own tools anymore. You simply publish the current version, which is the version 5.0. You can download that. You can use an ITS architecture tool, Enterprise Architect version 15. Open this in this tool you probably regularly use and regularly process anyway, and then process these materials further. And I would like to show you at which status we are now today and give you a short overview what are the materials that we now have published and make available. First, showing a brief intro into what are the project results, but then going into the details of what are the materials that we make available and that are available for download since quite a few months now, but the newest version from now on. And I will show you that some of the elements that are included in this software tool and in the materials with it. Frame Next has started 4 years ago with the 8 European countries and UK and Norway as partners, and they have done the usual project cycle of developing European project. We went into state-of-the-art analysis at the beginning. We had a full development cycle. And very soon in this development cycle, we have seen it makes no sense to generate a next version of an own tool for system architectures. We rather use one and migrate all the contents to a tool used in industry. And this was quite a big decision point project internally, but I'm glad we have decided to do that. And in the meantime, this migration to of all the content is concluded, and the first version has been published already a few months ago. And now I think we have a second version 5.0 with a lot of additional materials included. And these all is available in a tool that you probably use regularly, and which as a basis has the whole software development, which is model-based. So the basic element how we migrated our contents is that this is a software model which can be extended, which can be added with additional materials. And now we are doing our contents, our ITS architecture contents at European level in this published model, and we will do some reference architectures for it in the various areas which are interesting from a European aspect of ITS development. What are the areas where we have been targeted with in Frame Next? And these are the ones that you know from the ITS directive. And we have started with the area C, the road safety related traffic information, and have created there something like a reference architecture for the NAP, the National Access Points to Data. A second part which we have used how to see how the migration works and how the new tool works was the EU-wide and interoperable eCall implementation. Also there you will see the example in a reference architecture, and you can look into the details of eCall from an architecture point of view, from a standards point of view, and I'm quite sure you will have some insights there if you download the tool and look at the different details of it. The other elements that you see here, the EU-wide multimodal traffic information, real-time transport information, CITS and linking vehicles and infrastructures, and the safe and secure truck parking, are currently in the final stages of being developed as reference architectures and will be published soon. And they all, what you see here, will be published by the end of this year. Therefore, you will see these reference architectures very soon published, with now the first ones, the NAP and the eCall, included in the current version and made publicly available. Background of the NAP, why has this been selected, is, as you know, many European countries have implemented a national access point to data. They have implemented it for static data, for dynamic data, and for giving access to it. And all of these countries have made, let's say, a background architecture, which is included in our reference architecture, and they from now on will start to harmonize these NAPs. This will be done in a newly launched project only since a few weeks, which is called NAPCore. And the basic input of NAPCore is the reference architecture we have created and the basic input how to see how static data, how dynamic data, and how the accessibility can be done easily at process level and can be added and compared within the European member states. So I think this is quite a good news that the member states have realized that this access to data needs to be simplified, needs to be made easier in the various countries, and they will use this architecture model to check if this is possible or not and how this is easily possible to harmonize. The other example where we with our reference architecture are going into publicly available standards is the CITS area. There we are currently working on the reference architecture for CITS, and we are basing our specifications which are publicly available from C-Roads. By the way, also there, C-Roads has published the latest version of specs, version 2.0, just now, in the latest days, and we have started to integrate it in the reference architecture with the version 1.8 with the previous one, but we will obviously, before we publish the new version, we will update to the latest one, and then the overall reference architecture and the documentation available from C-Roads will also be published as an architecture material and will be published at software level as one of the areas where you can look into the details of the defined at architecture level. Where are all these materials and where can you find them? Well, the first version is obviously you have access to Enterprise Architect at this link for additional materials for the software itself. You know that there do exist many tutorials and these kind of things. For the elements we have generated and we make publicly available from the FrameNext team, there is the link that is at framenext.eu. And all the time when this is one of the official versions being published, which is relevant at EU level, it will also be made available at frameonline.eu. So FrameNext can be seen as the development part of this, which is for sure quite soon concluded at the end of this year. But this will be maintained, this architecture materials and the software will also be maintained afterwards, and the official versions will be published on frameonline.eu as well. Now, if you download this package and if you open this one and use it or try to use it on your own, what is it that you see and what is included? And the first part that you would immediately see is this whole model has been migrated to an architecture based, to a model based process. So yes, you will see that there is a large part of this Metamodel definitions is included. You will then see that also there is the historical materials of Frame of the European ITS framework architecture are still available, and they can be searched for and seen within the details of the repository. And you would also see that in this new framework architecture, there is a toolbox, which is an adapted one in Enterprise Architect to the materials that we have created in Frame. So you can handle all these elements we have defined and all the details we have specified as stereotypes, as data links, as all the various elements you have. You can handle them based on the usual let's say processes with software defined elements you are used to. You can drag and drop them, you copy and paste them from the toolbox into your architecture and so on. So this is regular use of a standard software tool, and you will be surprised how easy it is to quickly generate some of the new elements in the context of your software architectures. So the overview of what is here included is at one side the frame model and all the stereotypes, the connectors, and the various types of links. There are logical links, there are data links, there are defined or specifications links. And these elements, these created stereotypes, are included in the Metamodel and are defined there. You can obviously, as you have some background of enterprise architect, you are used to that. You can look into the details of the specifications and the definitions of these single elements directly in the software tool, and you can also check what the current links to other elements are and how the definitions and the specifications are. The second part, this frame toolbox. I think also this is an interesting element that we now have created, and this simply makes it easier to handle and manipulate all the various artifacts and elements we have defined. Makes it easier to create them, to copy them, to integrate them in your own work, and that's the reason why this specific toolbox has been added to the version that we have published as an additional file. And this toolbox is then available simply when you open one of the models and when you create your own architecture out of the elements which are available or out of additional ones you select. The big content part, where really the European elements and the European definition come into the play of this game, are the various reference architectures. We have, as I said before, we have made already one for the NAP, for the National Access Point to Data. We have created one and will publish it for eCall, and others that I mentioned before will follow. These all will be based on the basic Metamodel. They will be based on the reference elements and things selected from the ITS architecture point of view. And they can also be used in additional subsets of this architecture, which you would like to create in your own context or in your own context of your products, if this is necessary to be, let's say, valid or let's say has a link and has to be, let's say, linked up with existing systems in the transport domain. What would, if you start up Enterprise Architect, you download the files, and what would this startup of the landing page look like? You would see the whole project browser, as you see it here at the left part, and you would see the included elements, and you would then see the landing page of the European ITS framework architecture. As you see, also the additional materials, for example, a user guide, how to create something, the glossary of documents and definitions that you have access to are directly included. And there are obviously additional online documentation and examples available. And these buttons here, so the areas which you then select as for NAP or for eCall or for CITS, these are the direct links to the respective reference architectures, and we will then see an example how detailed the contents of such a reference architecture are. Obviously, these whole materials have been created to give you also the opportunity to create your own subset. Yeah, so there is a button where you can go and say, okay, I would like to create a reference architecture for another area of ITS. I would like to use the existing elements where they exist. I would add other ones. And you would then have something like a user architecture template and the respective things that can be added or can be copied, can be used from other elements and so on. So I think this is the way how many of the users in the future will use this tool. They will create their own subsets. And possibly also there will be a mechanism to submit these subsets again, if this is a topic which is relevant at the European level, to be harmonized, to be looked at it together. Then I think it would be a good idea to create such a subset together as a group or as a single company or association. Submit this subset and say, would it be possible to give to let this documentation be open and accessible, and at the same time make this subset available for a specific area of ITS, simply to extend the use quicker, to give it a push in providing the distribution in various countries in Europe, or to promote a service which has been created with this subset of the architecture. So this is the basic starting point, how you get into these materials of FrameNext, or of the ITS architecture, which is in short very often called Frame. And for the resources that you then would see if you go in such a single detailed element, like here, we've clicked on the Metamodel, and you see that in this Metamodel now, it's not only a technical part anymore of the architecture. There are 4 different layers which explain the motivational part of it, which is seen here at the top level. Then there is a business layer of it. What does the service definition look like? What are the user needs that need to be taken into account? What are the actors and the companies and organizations involved? Then there is an application layer. This is the layer where you then see, okay, if this is the ITS service I want to model, where are the application running? How are they sharing data? How are they, with which elements and links are they connected? And the final, the basic layer is the so-called data layer. So also there, these are the 4 layers that have been taken into account in the whole definition of the Metamodel. And these 4 layers have also been defined for the reference architectures you have seen, and where you then will see an example. And where in these various layers, you have also the links to the respective valid and latest version of standards. We are well aware that an architecture in the meantime has not only own requirements and has a motivational layer with an ITS vision, with various mission statement and so on, but a big part of our current ITS systems is defined by the external standards that are currently valid. And in these reference architectures, these standards can be inserted as references and can then be made linkable to the various areas, for example, the application layer, or in some standard types to the data layer. What you here see is the overview of the Metamodel, and I'm well aware that all these elements cannot be seen on one spot, but this only should show you how rich and detailed these definitions are, and that you then, with this model, can go into the details, look up how the service is defined, what the process steps are, which are the data that are needed to process it, and so on. And this again shows that the basis of the new architecture tool is really this model, which takes into account the overall definition of the single elements, but also their links and how they are used. So the single elements, which in Enterprise Architect are called stereotypes, then the additional logical links between them, but also if these are data links, what are the protocols that are used to connect these 2 elements? What are the data rates, the requirements for this single link? So this should give you an impression how detailed these materials are that we now have generated and will provide and make publicly available, and that you then obviously could look into it or on your own if you're a full enterprise architect specialist, or also in future open and available seminars which explain such a detailed reference architecture in more detail, and where additional questions can be put forward to some of the elements presented. As a general statement, how does Enterprise Architect as a software work? I have only made a screenshot of this so-called diagram panel. You know, there is this project browser where you see all the elements and you can click on them and use them. You can then click on diagrams, data program links, terminators, all the elements you see there. And it then really very much works like drag and drop with the elements you selected and with the normal functionalities of, let's say, software development environments. I'm sure you have seen similar ones if you use software tools in your regular working environment, and this is one which works exactly the same way. So you click on the respective element, you can copy it, show up the context diagrams and use it. And this is also what you would see in Enterprise Architect and where you would see the main details of these elements defined in Frame for the European ITS architecture. Another part, what I have shown you before and I've mentioned briefly, but which comes where you come aware how this has been included and what is this additional thing available in the software itself. You see that if you only open the Enterprise Architect file that we distribute, you have already included something like a toolbox which is frame specific. Yeah, so this frame toolbox has been created and generated by the team, has been programmed as an additional script and as a data package within this version. And you can open this toolbox and then you can obviously handle, for example, data objects that we have created. You can use applications, you can use interfaces or ITS services which are defined, and you can simply include them in your own architecture, selecting them and copying and dragging and dropping them into the part where you want to use it and where you want to connect it to other elements which are there. This is also true for specific functions. Here I mentioned as example the low-level functions, but you have it also for overall ITS services. You have it for actors, terminators, for all the elements we have created in FrameNext, and this is the way how, let's say, the published contents that we have made available in FrameNext can be further used and processed in your next steps of work, of architecture work. That is the way how we have foreseen that they will be used, and also that the documentation of this, let's say, architecture work can be created and generated as outputs. By the way, Enterprise Architect is not the only tool which exists in this domain, but you can export from Enterprise Architect in various file formats. You can do that in UML. You can do that in other file formats as well, and it is not only because you have created your subset of the architectures in Enterprise Architect, you can process it in other parts and in other language and file formats as well. So this is possible also with the future elements we publish. We will publish Enterprise Architect file formats, but we will also make available UML descriptions and definitions as a file, and therefore this can be processed in various tools. Another thing I would like to show, how are these so-called reference architectures made available as materials, and what would you see if you look at the, for example, eCall reference architecture, where you see here the so-called landing page. Yeah? In such a reference architecture, you have the overview of the eCall as it was defined in the ITS directive. This is our basis. But then you have all the various parts that are included in such a reference architecture. You have included that here as the various sub-packages that you can go into it and look at the details. As I said before, you can go into the motivational layer, you can go into the functional view, you can go into what are the physical elements that are needed to implement eCall. And these are the starting point for getting into a reference architecture and then look at the various elements, how they are currently defined. There are also things included like an organizational view. So who is needed to that a full eCall service chain is up and running and working? Who are the organizations needed and what are their tasks in completing this service? You see that this is the part for eCall with the elements included. What you see here on the left-hand side is that we have set down the basic requirements that have been in the ITS directive and then are the eCall related regulations. These are here only included as additional references. But they are obviously easy to find and they are linked to the elements which are part of the architecture. So you will find the references relevant for the public service answering points related to the organizations which run it. You will find the references to the mobile network operators which form part of eCall related to the transmission of the minimum set of data by the telecom operators. So these are the elements that you would find for a single reference architecture. We, as FrameNext, we will also make future webinars and make the details of such a reference architecture available to explain the details, share the contents and the links which are included. And we will make available additional, let's say, seminars and webinars to really look into the details and be available for questions in a coming series of things where these reference architectures are presented. Now we will do a very first seminar very soon at the ITS World Congress in October, but we will then in October, November, December this year and also at the beginning of next year make available invitations and possibilities to these webinars to look into the details. And if you or your colleagues are interested in part of this or in a specific part of this, let us know, come back to us, and you will for sure have the possibility to look into the details. What you see here is the landing page for the same that you have seen before for the eCall reference architecture. This is the landing page for the NAP, for the National Access Point to Data. Also here, you would have opening it directly up in the software tool. You would then have the full, let's say, the functions that the NAP provides, the organizational view, how this is presented and created. And generally, the National Access Point for Data is nothing else than, let's say, in a one-sentence definition, a metadata directory of traffic, of the available traffic sources. And the point that the National Access Point to Data has, and that all of the functions have, is that they make available this metadata in the transport domain and make it available for information service providers, so for content consumer, but they also list all the data sources available at the data provider. I know that several of the European countries are doing much more. They are offering much higher functionalities and much more elements that they present at their national access point. But this is the basic functionality we have included. And as I said before, we will further develop this reference architecture from the national access point in the so-called NAPCore project, where we will go for the harmonization and we will look at the common functions that all the national access points in Europe have, and that make it also easy to access to these materials, and then to compare some of the parts in the various countries to compare, for example, is it possible to create the same service in various countries? I think this is an interesting aspect where you then can look into the functionalities, into the data available, and see, is this an ITS service that I can offer in various European countries? And I think this is the basic element where you can look at these details. I try to conclude for what I have presented and what in my view is, let's say, the output of FrameNext currently. The first one, yes, we have migrated all our contents which previously did exist to this model-based approach and have transferred these contents to a general tool used in the ITS industry. These results of the published version are available now. Please have a look at the framenext.eu site, download it and look into the details. And we are very eager to see what your first feedbacks are if you look into these materials, and if the thing that you would expect at European level to be available, also to be useful. We know that additional reference architectures will be added very soon for CITS. We are in the finishing stages of it, for truck parking and for others. And I think we will very soon cover the whole basic areas which are interested from an ITS aspect and a directive point of view at European level. But this is at the same time also the question, if you see topics that in the ITS area could be interesting to be looked at European level, then I would say there is a possibility to start such a topic, to create a respective reference architecture, probably to bring together a group of companies or people which are interested in forwarding this, and to create a first version. And I think then the materials created within such a software tool, but also as output, reports, and similar, can be a very interesting starting point for a detailed discussion, and also for creating the right questions. Does this really why does this to be handled at European level? How many regions have to contribute to it? How do they see the link to it, and various things? I think this is one of the ways how these architecture materials will be used in the future. And I would expect that we have created a tool where we can look into service interoperability. So I think this is an interesting aspect which comes together, is a consequence of the new tool. And I hope that this will be the main aspect of the future use, apart from creating additional service architectures in your own context and seeing how your own ITS product is linked to all the existing systems in the ITS world. You know, and we are well aware that currently and today, there is not one single product which is created on the green field, but most of the products and the elements we do are linked to existing ones, have interfaces, have protocols to others. And I think also there, looking into the details of the architecture is an interesting aspect, and can help in getting these links, let's say, related to respective standards or to respective data protocols. These are my conclusions, and yeah, thank you for this very short update of all the materials that we have created in FrameNext. Yeah, and I'm available for questions, and obviously you can also reach me after the seminar, but first let me hear if there are questions from your side.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Alexander. Super interesting presentation and insight into the work. Well, maybe we can start with one question that I've had before this webinar. I was wondering, would Frame Next and the future evolutions be suitable also for mobility as a service or electromobility, which are also starting to be implemented more and more across Europe?
In my personal view, yes. For electromobility, for example, the topic of access to charging points and what are the data shared that you can that you can access it. This would be a typical, in my view, this would be a typical aspect that you can model at data level. You can then speak with the organizations involved in it, and you can then see if they have an agreement between their members, and you can model this. So in my view, this would be a very well suited area. For mobility as a service, I think similar. I would see it similarly. Yeah, if you say, okay, I would like to concentrate mobility as a service in this area. Now, really, I make one example. Don't know, electric scooter rentals and buses. Yeah. You could go into the details and say, okay, how does my mobility as a service look like? Who needs to be involved? How does the model, how to use it look like? And I think the tool is one where many of these aspects can be generated and worked on in detail. If the tool itself does automatically not create agreements, and there you then obviously need to speak to the single organizations and they need to come together. But in my point of view, with the tool, the important questions and aspects can be modeled, and the additional questions can be put down that need to be clarified. This would be my view on this.
Okay, very good. So very much welcoming the mass mobility as a service, electromobility, but also, of course, other topics that our colleagues also might have. Now, I've seen your slides on the C roads. I've seen your slides on the NAPCOR. We're also involved in NAPCOR. It's a fantastic initiative where we are working with more or less every single European member state plus additional countries outside EU. So, of course, the member states and national authorities are very much involved in the work of NAPCOR, but also Frame Next, basically. How can we get more the usage of the industry of the ITS, European ITS reference architecture? How can we encourage them, and maybe which sectors are most relevant in your point? Which sector of the industry should be really looking into this more than they're doing today?
I think one of the first sectors, which is currently, let's say, in the rollout phase, but being deployed all over Europe, is for sure CITS. This is, in my view, a very important one, simply because only in the context of zeroth, I think nearly initially planned have been around 20 cities which joined. I think in the meantime, there are more than 50 cities in Europe which are currently in the steps of deploying CITS. And deploying CITS on one hand is starting always with traffic information, but on the other hand will be linked to many other areas. For example, in the urban environment, for sure, parking will become a topic, or priority for public transport services will become a topic, which is interesting for the cities. And in these areas, I think, which are related to CITS and have a link to it, many of the European cities, but also regions, are becoming involved. And I would expect that also many of ERTICO members at industry level are involved and are becoming even more involved in the next time, exactly in these aspects where the cities and the regions are thinking of deploying the systems always more and always bringing more content online. I think that would be the first one, I would guess. And which I would immediately see. The other part, which is also, I think, quite difficult to speak about and to argue, is this whole point of the urban access restrictions. I think the abbreviation is UVAR, urban vehicle access restrictions. But you know that many cities in Europe are currently discussing, thinking about what are the rules of giving access to the city. Does it need to be emission free? At which times can I deliver? What are the logistics sectors allowed to do, and so on. And I think also there, if we are not able to formulate clear rules which are understandable, not only to the ones living in the city, but also coming to as a visitor or as an industry sector, I think then we have really a difficult task. And I would expect that that is one of the areas where the architecture can define the right rules, can make them clear and understandable to everybody, and can be an area which could be interesting in simply clarifying these questions. I don't think that we as consumer would like to have 15 different rule sets for entering a city, or in Austria, in Germany, in France, or in Spain. We will be in some of these countries in the future when we are allowed to travel again. And nevertheless, we would like to understand how I can access to city center, to specific districts, and so on. So this would be the two areas where I would expect that very soon the architecture work becomes relevant for defining the common denominators of these ITS services.
Indeed. And of course, with urban vehicle access restrictions, we all know that the harmonization needs to be done on a policy level as well. But maybe by providing the same, let's say, architecture framework, it is going to make decision making and harmonization easier than it is today. We have another question, and that is looking at when you start working with framework architecture, what are the main challenges for the newcomers to start working?
I think the first challenge is really, in previous, with this new version of Frame Next, you really get a very powerful overall tool of software development. You get an easy to start version with one reference architecture where you can look at the details. But I think the challenge is really to select the modules and the elements that you need in this software tool. Obviously, Enterprise Architect, like all others of these, let's say, software tools used in industry, they have sector-specific additional functionalities. They have a lot of various things, and I think one of the first challenges is really to concentrate on the things you need and you regularly use, and then let's say extend also your capabilities, your capacities internally to the functions and to the elements you want regularly to use, and how to exchange with others. I think that is the interesting part, but also the challenging part at the beginning, to know exactly where to start and to get up and running. Yeah.
And of course, for that, if anybody is wondering where to start, then they can always contact you or other colleagues from FrameNext.
For sure.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. Just one last question before we let you go, Alexander. How does it look outside Europe? Because we know that countries, for example, like Turkey or Serbia or neighbor countries to EU, very often follow the European developments. Have you seen any interest from neighboring countries outside EU?
Thank you for the question, because I think for Turkey, we have made already with these new materials of Frame Next a very interesting workshop of several days for the Ministry of Transport. So they are following these developments very, very near and close. And they have in the meantime also created one of these examples of traffic management for motorways with this software tool. We know, and we have since we have published our first version of Frame materials, we have contact also from outside Europe. To be frank, we have also used some of the models and of the contents which have been done by our Australian colleagues. some of these elements and the data defined now included in our framework are with the background from Australia. So we have an exchange outside Europe. With our US colleagues, which have a quite large ITS architecture team, they still, let's say, stick obviously to their own and internal tools and software elements, but also there we had an external exchange and an interesting exchange with them. So yes, single countries are coming back to us. And I would expect that in the future this happens even more often, because the access to these materials is possible not only in the general standard English language, but is available also in various languages outside Europe. And this could be an interesting additional point simply to speak about ITS architectures.
Excellent, excellent. Alexander, many thanks for your time. We are at the end of this short workshop. There is a possibility for everybody who is coming who is joining us at the ITS World Congress next week in Hamburg to come by and visit Alexander and to meet him and the other members of the Frame Next consortium. Alexander, there was also a workshop that you are planning. Can you remind us all of the time and the date?
Yes, the workshop at the ITS World Congress is on Tuesday at 1, directly at our booth in the area of the exhibition, and the additional days of the next upcoming workshops will be published and will be distributed. Some of them coming not in the week after the Congress, but in the final week of October. The day is, I think, the 27th, if I remember it correctly, and this will be published and sent out as an invitation. And the webinars and the seminars will then be done for single reference architectures that we have created and for looking into the details of the architecture materials. Thank you very much for today, and looking forward to additional questions and feedbacks and things that you would like to know about the European reference architecture.
Excellent. Many thanks, Alexander. Many thanks, colleagues from Austria Tech, and also all colleagues from Frame Next consortium, basically. This is just the first in a row of a number of webinars, like Alexander has stated. We are going to share this recording with everybody who has participated. We are going to share it also widely, because we need to get the message out more, considering this fantastic work that we have seen that is happening in Europe. The work is just going to expand through NAPCOR, so through C-Roads and other collaborations. So everybody stay tuned, please, for the next coming events. I hope to meet you all in Hamburg, and I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon, and see you soon.